Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a grief expert, therapist, social worker, professor, and author. As an author, she has either written or co-written the nonfiction books The Art of Grieving, Warrior Mother, and Stillpoint. Her name is Sheila K. Collins, and my interview with Sheila will follow the note-taking sounds. Sheila K. Collins, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Well, thank you. It's really good to be with you today.
You have had a 4 decades long career as a therapist, social worker, and professor. What was your work like in those fields?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I think I have to start first by saying I started out as a dancer, and then I became a social worker. And so I put those two things together and I became a dancing social worker. So what that meant was that I used the things I knew about dance and theater with my clients and my students and in my teaching and writing. So I was a little, odd, I guess. I didn't totally fit in with some of the other people, but it's been a good way to cross over those divisions.
You are a grief expert, and your most recent book is titled The Art of Grieving, How Art and Art Help Us Grieve and Live Our Best Lives. I might have misspoke about the subtitle there just a little bit.
No, you've got it right. You've got it right. So I want to back up a little bit to tell you that this is my 4th book, and that an earlier book was my memoir, and that book was Warrior Mother, Fierce Love, Unbearable Loss, and the Rituals That Heal. I know you have a lot of writers in your audience, and one of the things about writing is that, first of all, it's a value to the writer. Writing is the way we process, the way we understand and express ourselves. And there's a lot of discoveries that are made. So when I had these experiences in my own life, our son died of AIDS at 31 years old after 4 years of journeying with that disease when there was no medicine at that time. He was on some trials, but no medicine. And then our daughter died of breast cancer. So when you have when the universe hands you this much, you got to say, what am I going to do with it? So that's where I wrote Warrior Mother book. And it was very helpful to me. And when I went around and, promoted the book, and I even performed the book using some of my theater experience, the people that were there were very welcoming. They really enjoyed it. But I began to notice that they were also very uncomfortable, maybe not wanting to be sure that they should recommend it to anyone else. And so then I began to learn we don't talk about these things. And grief is not supposed to be talked about. And that is a real loss for all of us, because we got a lot of losses. We got a lot of, we all got troubles, as the song says. So anyway, that's what led now to the book I have, because I began to see what was it that helped us, that helped me and my family, and it was the arts. And so having a way to express in storytelling, for example. So one of the arts that I look at is we want to know the stories. If you think about, you go to a funeral or a memorial service and people are talking about that person, and you're hearing things about that person you didn't know because you didn't know them in that circumstance. So we begin to get a fuller picture of our loved one by hearing what other people have to say about them. So this has been very, very full experience for me, and I'm just following the trail of it. I'm just following as things are opening up for me in relation to the book. So I've been going around. I just met with a whole big conference of people who are artists who use the arts as therapy. So the International Expressive Arts Therapy Association just had their annual conference, and actually they hadn't had one since COVID. But we got together, and it was wonderful to be able to share this information with this group of people because they know that it turns out the arts are medicine. They, they can really be medicine for us.
And as I said, your most recent book is titled The Art of Grieving. And I did get the subtitle of your book correct. Without spoiling too much about The Art of Grieving, can you tell us a little more about your most recent book?
Absolutely, yes. So I think that, well, first of all, putting these two things together, I know I teach a system called Interplay, which is a storytelling improvisational form and helping people to tell their stories in a transforming way. So, we can get into where we just tell the story over and over, oh dear, and it doesn't go anywhere or make us feel any better. We don't learn from our own stories if we do them that way. But if we do them in an artful way, in a fun way, in a playful way, then we learn and we learn from other people's stories too. So, yeah, so what I recommend for people, I have a chapter in the book on dance. I have a chapter, which is, of course, my home art. I have a chapter on storytelling. I have a chapter on music. And music is amazing because it turns out we are vibratory beings. And so what happens with music is that it starts to vibrate our all the cells in our bodies and lifts us up often. I think your audience probably realizes that sometimes if they're working out and they the kind of music they want is stimulating music, right, and uplifting music. So and that keeps you going, and it's easier to do your workout with that kind of music happening. So it's the notion of using the arts to fully express and to really get into our creativity. And so that's my journey right now. In fact, what I'm about to do now is connect with art makers. The subtitle of my book is Art and Art Making. And again, it turns out that some arts really are helpful in processing our losses or processing our own creativity. And so, for example, mosaics. Mosaics are pieces of broken something, broken stones or broken chips, and you put them together in a beautiful way. You create something beautiful from those broken things. So I'm going to be joining with some people that know about that, and we're going to have people be able to play with that particular approach. And other kinds of art, with dance, for example, our memories, it turns out, are in our body. We think of them as just being in our brains, but actually they're in our whole bodies. And so your senses often stimulate a memory. The smell of fresh bread, or the smell of a garden may give you a memory. And so that's how we stay connected, because it turns out we don't really want to get away from our past. We want to bring it with us. We want to stay in touch with who we were as a young person. We want to stay in touch with our ancestors. And all of that is possible by using the arts.
What inspired you to connect the arts to grieving?
Well, I guess that's a good question. How it started. Okay, I was with my friend when she was dying, and she asked me to come. She was in the hospital, and they said there was nothing they could do, and she was going to be in hospice, and so I went to be with her, and neither one of us knew what we were doing. I mean, we didn't never had that experience, and so I spent 14 days with her, as it ended up, and So it was like a full life that we had during that time. Friends visited, people came and sang songs, and uh, and then what happened for me when I was with her at the very end, and again, I didn't know what I was doing. But the nurse said, if she keeps breathing like that, she's not going to be around very long. So I thought, well, maybe this is it. So I took her hand and I was inspired to just sing a song from my women's group. And, kind of what you might do with a child to sing a lullaby. And so I sang this song. And as I began to sing it, it was, I am woman, I grow out of the earth, beautiful, powerful, and wise. And then the words changed automatically by themselves. And then it changed into, I am woman, I go back to the earth. And at that moment, she let go. And I mean, it took my breath away. And and then later I learned, oh, there's a whole thing about this. It's called threshold choirs. And there are people in some parts of the country that come and sing songs with a person because it turns out your hearing is the last thing to go. So you can still hear, even though you may not be speaking or anyway. I've had some fabulous experiences and very transformative. And I know that we don't know about these because nobody ever talks about it. So that was probably one of the things that. So I ended up then dancing at my son's funeral and using and telling stories about him that people might not know and they needed to know. So people said to me afterwards, I didn't know your son, but now I kind of feel like I do. So that's a gift right there.
Uh, an interesting fact about you is that you danced at your own son's funeral.
Right.
Given that in North American, Western European culture, uh, grieving isn't really commonly perceived like that, how was your dancing at the funeral received by other funeral goers?
Well, yes, it was. Yeah. So one of the things that happened as I was doing this, and I'm telling the story about my son, and he was born on April Fool's Day, and then he died on the summer solstice. And I was doing a little movement thing as I was dancing as I was telling that story, and I hear a little voice say, "What is she doing?" And of course, in this stage whisper that everyone can hear. And I'm thinking, that is 3-year-old Will, and he's probably saying out loud what most everybody else is thinking. So I stopped. I felt it was so funny to hear him. And I went over to him and I said, I'm dancing for Uncle Ken. Do you want to help me and do that? And oh, he did not. He buried himself in his mother's dress. But his older brother, who was 5 at the time, he took my hand. And so it turned into a dance with my grandson, my 5-year-old grandson. And this was like a gift from heaven because I felt so much joy. Now, at the same time, I had a tremendous amount of sorrow that was still there. So then this was the lesson of you can have two feelings totally opposite at the same time. You can be in your joy and you can also have sorrow. And I, that was that's something I want everybody to know because we can get so taken over by more negative things. But recognizing you can still, in the midst of that, there can still be this incredible joy. And so, of course, I became convinced that people need to know this. And I guess that's what teachers do. We learn stuff and then we figure out a way to pass it on, as I'm doing today with you, talking with you and your wonderful podcast.
You've written The Art of Grieving and Warrior Mother, and you said you wrote 4 books. What are the other 2 called?
Well, actually, my first book, which has been redid, so that's why I say I had 4, because But the first book I ever did was called Stillpoint, a self-care playbook for caregivers to find ease and time to breathe and reclaim joy. And so the when I wrote it originally, the concept was at that time, I'm an old person here, so 30 some years ago, that we need to take care of ourselves in order to be able to take care of other people. That and so this was the basis of that book, which was kind of revolutionary at the time because people thought if you can't be selfish here. So I kind of defined it as self-care is a place in between just taking care of everybody else or being selfless and that would be selfless or being in the place where you just take care of you, just me. And so it's an and anyway, when I was doing another book, I was advised to release this book and update the research on it because it turns out that people who take care of people often die before the person if they don't take care of themselves. And so I did. I got a colleague, Christine Gautreax, to help me with all the. She's a social worker too, another dancing social worker, and so updated the research of that, and we started, and then we redid the book, and then we were going around the country with that, and March of 2020 we were shut down, so nobody, especially at my age, was going to be wandering around the country talking about anything. So we put it online. She's younger than me, and she said, we have to put this online. And I said, in all my ancient wisdom, what we do is not going to work online, I said. And boy, am I glad I was wrong, because we still meet online once a week with people around the country who are caregivers, either professionally, like social workers or therapists or counselors, or they're taking care of somebody in their family, an elder, perhaps, or children, but they're doing it professionally and personally. So that's been a highlight too of the book. We go through the book, we take sections and look at this piece and look at the piece about how we're doing with just how we're doing with taking care of ourselves. And each week we put online in the chat box what we're going to do that week to make sure we need to be taking care of ourselves. And we know when we write it and we tell people about it, you're more likely to follow through. So we mutually support each other in living life fully and not suffering.
Regarding the Art of Grieving and Warrior Mother, how long did it take you to write each of those two books, and what was the writing process like for you?
Yeah, I think for a lot of your reader, or a lot of your audience, they probably know that each of these books takes years. I mean, in fact, with young people that are interested in becoming writers, I said, well, maybe you want to start with a chapbook or something, a booklet, something smaller, because it is quite a commitment. I think Warrior Mother took about 7 years before it was published, before we actually got to publication. And probably my current book, probably about the same. In fact, with my current book, what I did, I started thinking about, I started a writing practice of exploring the topic of what if we looked at grief as just something that is gonna happen. Don't even think it's not. Loss is just everywhere and constant. So whether it's the loss of something that happens from the weather or your job, or in other words, looking at the world through the lens of loss. And so I started every week, I would write about something, either something that happened in my own life or something that was happening in the big world, and the recent flood would be an example. So writing about that and then looking at how can we process that? Because, grief is the way that what it means to grieve is to process loss. That's that's really what it means. And so how do we do that? And it turns out writing is one of the ways. When you write something, and even if you don't ever read it again or nobody else reads it, that processing in that using the words and even we know if you write it by hand, it does something different to your brain than if you write it or type it. So, so there's a lot of power in writing, even if nobody ever reads it. But this is how my book. So I had so much material by the time, and when COVID came, I thought, okay, I'm in my room. I can't go anywhere. This is the time to put it together. And so so that's why I think the whole process was at least 7 years, and I think that's probably pretty uh, normal, or probably that's way most people would say it takes at least that long.
Are all your books independently, traditionally, or hybrid published, or did you use different publishing methods for each of your books?
Um, the second, yes, different things. So, my first book, at the time I did my first book, the hybrid publishing wasn't available. That hadn't come about yet. And what was available, we had a clinic. My husband, I'm a social worker. My husband's a psychologist, and we had a clinic, a behavioral health care clinic in Texas for 10 years. So we published the book through our company. And because as mental health professionals, we felt the biggest audience would be people that would be either caregivers themselves or professional caregivers, or that would be part of people's mental health. So that was my first one. The second one, by Warrior Mother, at that point, that was hybrid, and She Writes Press was the name of the company that published that, and that was a very wonderful experience, I have to say. And also, it was an interesting thing because publishers at that time were not very open to publishing about grief. When I tell you people don't talk about it, people don't publish about it either. So many of the women who had gotten their books published by, I was in their first catalog. So She Writes Press, 2013 is when it came out. And we shared stories about what we were told. We were told grief doesn't sell. Grief doesn't sell. And well, it turns out, yeah, it does, but you have to get it published. So She Writes Press was very helpful in many of our stories getting out there. So yeah, so I've used a lot of different systems. The last one I did with I have a colleague now who has we've put together, I guess, a publishing house, and so a very simple thing, but we did it ourselves. When I looked at putting it out for a big publisher, I was told that, well, take out that stuff about COVID because nobody is going to print anything about COVID once it's done, which is the problem about grief in the world. And we have to change that. The only way to change it is don't be stopped by what they're telling you. That's advice I have for your authors. Don't be stopped by what they're telling you because you're writing about something new. You're what you're writing is something that's going to change the world. So, and even the process of how you print it, how you publish it can change the world.
One final question. You mentioned this earlier on in the interview. You direct the Wing and a Prayer Pittsburgh Players, which is an interplay based performance troupe. What types of performances does the Wing and a Prayer Pittsburgh Players perform?
Well, thanks for asking about that. Yeah, that is another one of the things that got me so into the arts and certainly the art of storytelling. So, yeah, when I came to Pittsburgh in about 20 years ago, I had started this. I had started interplay companies or groups around the country, and here I was in another city that didn't know anything about this. So I started it, and I got this troupe together, and how it kind of works is that there's a theme, and maybe the theme, well, we would connect with organizations and help them to sort of, so we connected with an art gallery, contemporary craft, and they were doing a show, and all the pieces in their show were about ending violence, and it was called "End Enough Violence, Artists Speak Out." And so then we would come in and we would note or attend to one of the pieces, and then we would respond with our own stories about that piece. What did it evoke in us? Like I remember one was something with a photograph of a car in it, and one of the women started saying, "Oh, this takes me back," and you know, so we know that art evokes something from the viewer or the person who is receiving it, and so it became a real exchange of fulfilling something with the piece and a different way to interact with art. So yeah, so that's an example. But we did things. We worked for we did a retreat for people living with AIDS, for example, and we would teach them how to tell stories with each other, how to support one another using the arts, how to create. We have something we call a gesture choir, where somebody tells a story using big gestures, and then people behind them just do the gestures with them. And that there's this wonderful sort of thing that happens when somebody's gesturing because it takes you with them and it feels like you get inside of their story. So, very fascinating things happen when we play together and use the arts with our own stories.
Sheila, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest to interview.
Well, thank you very much. And I love what you're doing to get out the word and to help people who are interested in writing. Everybody should be writing, and whether they don't have to call themselves, uh, authors, they can just use writing to process and share your stories.
Sheila was an insightful guest to interview, and I will include a link to Sheila's Substack newsletter in the text description of this episode. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.